What inspired a licensed psychologist to drive herself crazy by entering the field of publishing poetry? Can you recount the story of how CavanKerry came to be?
Actually, I always wanted to write. I always wanted to write poetry, but I didn't believe that I had any talent, because when I sat down to write poems, the next day they seemed pretty trite and disinteresting to me, because basically I thought it should just come out of me, a real dilettante. When I was in my early 40s, I went through a very severe clinical depression. And one of the things that came out of that was the realization that, with the help of my husband and my shrink, was that I had never really done anything that was just for me. And I needed to think about that, and it was true. And out of that psychological and emotional work came my commitment to see if I could learn to write poetry. And so I started to learn to write poetry. I came through lots of workshops and ended up with an MFA in creative writing. And I started to send my work out, and I had a manuscript, and I started to get all of these very exciting, positive letters from publishers and contest judges saying that I was a finalist in the contest, but alas, no cigar. So my friends were going through the same thing at the same time. We were all basically at the same level. And I had been obsessing for a very long time about the fact that I really wanted to start a press. I wanted to find out, well, I wanted to just do my part in offering publishing opportunities for my friends and myself and other writers who were looking for publishers, particularly new voices, because that's the hardest thing in the world to do, to get your first book published. Just like get a job, they want experience. Where do you get the first experience? It's the same thing with a book of poems, or any book. So I talked and I talked and I talked, and I had all sorts of ideas about what the press would do and what the books would look like, and miraculously, my husband Alan got a gift from a relative who was deceased, and he gave me the money as the startup funds to start the press. And there I went. I really believe that this is my most important work. I had a lot of careers. I had predictable careers. In my generation, you were either a teacher. If you went to college, you were a teacher, or you were a nurse. I wanted to be a doctor, and my biology teacher told me that with my grades in biology, she didn't recommend it. I wanted to be an architect, but women didn't do those things. I was really expected to get a job, get the training to have a job that would allow me to be home in the afternoon when my children came home from school. because that's what women were supposed to do. So I went through all of the steps. I was a teacher. Then I became much more interested in what was going on with the students, why they were totally tuned out of my lesson. Remarkable that it was, that they would really tune out. But and then I found that there was too much interference in my work with students working in a school. So I had to get a PhD. And it was basically not long after that I started to really get depressed. And so CavanKerry is writing itself, particularly poetry, and creating this press has been really the most important work that I've done as a professional and as an artist. I thought at one time it was getting a PhD. I'm glad I got it, but it's not about having a PhD. It's about having the opportunity to write and have my work published, and it's an opportunity to provide the same opportunity to other writers. It's not a particularly well thought of in the kind of elite academic circles for writers to publish their own work. Walt Whitman did it, Virginia Woolf did it, lots of people did it. But I don't know that there's a press around today that publishes the work of the publisher also. But we do it, and shamelessly, because it's the right thing to do, because my work deserves to be out there just like the other people. And so I probably am a bit of a rebel in that regard. And that's how I got to.
Let me ask, why is CavanKerry Press so committed to community?
I was brought up in the Bronx, right underneath the Throgs Neck Bridge, in a little community called Edgewater Park. And Edgewater was basically peopled by mostly Irish and German families that had started. They had been, basically, my dad was a super for a building. They basically were, they had kind of tenement apartments. And then they had weekends that they could go up to Edgewater to their little house. My mother and father bought theirs for $700. And my father and the men in the community all raised our houses, put cellars in, added a foot to the house, was 6 feet to the house, put in a bathroom. We all ended up with winterized houses. The parents all moved us up full-time to Edgewater. And everyone took care of everybody else. Everybody was, the dads took care of the buildings, made sure they did this, after 5 when they got home in the evening, and all day Saturday. Sunday was the Lord's Day, so they didn't work. And the mothers discipline the kids. So if Mrs. Watson down the block saw me do something that I wasn't supposed to be doing, I was in as much trouble with her as I was eventually going to be with my own mother. I knew nothing else for the first, well, I moved out of my parents' house when I graduated from college, actually, in my 20s. I just believe in working together and making things happen for oneself and for others. It just makes sense to me.
Great. The next questions are basically about what makes CavanKerry unique. First off, can you explain how it got its name?
Yes, it was. It actually refers to the two counties in Ireland where my parents were born and raised, and where I really believe my writing comes from. I really believe that I grew out of the ground there, and so somebody had mentioned to me, my mother was very ill at the time, and said, well, why don't you name it Mary's Press? And I thought, not only was I not crazy about the sound of it, but I didn't want to neglect my father's role in bringing writing to me. And so I decided, and I didn't want to have something like, Mom and Dad Press, or Eugene and Mary. So I thought, well, what's more basic than the places in Ireland where they came from?
Mm. And why do you emphasize and spend so much effort on making the books beautiful, physically beautiful?
Because I really believe books should be beautiful. And they are the frames for the art that they hold. And that was another tear I was on when I was thinking about starting my press. I said, wait to see the books I'm going to produce. Because all you could see was crap, in bookstores. And I love books, and I always believed in books. And I said, it's disrespectful to publish a book, to produce a book of art in a plastic frame. Mm-hmm. So.
And why do you focus on books that explore the emotional and psychological aspects of everyday life? I find that the books physically draw you in because I always say I want to pet mine because it has this wonderful velour cover, some special magic on it, and the little fold flap that makes it look like a hardcover. And that draws me in as a reader when I read other CavanKerry books. But what does it mean for you to focus on the emotional and psychological aspects of life, which I also find more welcoming than some of the obscure stuff that I have trouble entering into as a reader?
Basically, it was the most natural work for me. It's the work that I wrote and write. It's work that I firmly believe people need to read. People need to read about what it feels like to be them, what the human experience is about, whether it's about illness or family or neighborhood or any other human experience. And I didn't want to, I always had the wind at my back because I started late. And I never wanted to write those poems. I thought they were nice, but they didn't interest me. And I was looking for the poem that I would want to read in the middle of the night if I woke up and needed to read something. And at the risk of embarrassing him, I have to give you a little anecdote about my son. Oi! And this is what poetry does. When David was packing up to go off to music, as he called it, concentration camp in the summer, I, came in and kind of casually said, "Well, what about books, honey?" He said, "Ma, I don't like to read." And I said, how can I be a writer and talk about everything being about me? How can I be a writer and have a son who doesn't read?
I have one.
And he said, "And you too." So, oh, good. But then I noticed in his suitcase books of Frost and Emily Dickinson, which I had given him years ago. I said, "Well, what are Frost and Dickinson doing in your bag then?" He said, "Poetry's different. You open it, you read for a couple of minutes, you close it, and you have something. You leave with something. That isn't the case with other books generally." And I truly believe that's true. I truly believe that that's one of the things that so magical about art, and in this particular case about poetry of people, of everyday life, not the heavy intellectual side type and that pushes you away.
How do you find or select poetry that can appeal to a wider audience?
Well, basically we let the word out that that's the work we're interested in. And you can tell that the people who have no idea about CavanKerry, and they are the ones who send us, and Gabe will agree with me on this, will send us books that are heady and no heart and kind of forbidding for a lot of people. And so the emphasis for us is on fine art, but fine art that is relatable, that is accessible, that speaks to the heart.
And how would you say the industry has changed in the last 20 years? It's been quite a 20-year period.
I can tell you that when I first started, I had no idea how to use a computer. The computer was, something that techies were using. Now, I can't claim that I know very much about a computer today, but I at least know how to do the things that I need to do on a computer. But it was kind of startling, and from that came ebooks, and actually prior to that, or maybe even at the same time, the giants were taking over the small booksellers. Mm-hmm. So there was Barnes and Noble, and there's Amazon, and there was Borders, and the bookseller, the individual bookseller, was very much abandoned by people who buy books, mostly because they still had to ask for a full list price, and were not giving you Amazon type deals. so there was that, and then there was the advent of the ebook, and it became very scary because people kept saying that books are done. You're in a field that no longer is relevant, and I said, yeah. But it was pretty horrible. It was really scary. But it has turned around. And I have to say something about ebooks. What the advantage that an ebook has given to writers is that if you have something to say, you can publish it. You can write it, and you can publish the book. And that's a pretty amazing thing, that you can make this thing happen for yourself. On the other hand, it was a very threatening experience for publishers of literary art. And now we're kind of back to small booksellers. Ebooks are still there, but they're not threatening us in the same way that they did at one time. And so we really have kind of gone full circle since I started. And now JD was saying, there he is. What was the percentage that you gave before about the
50% of my sales are ebooks, and then maybe 20% are audio. But the interesting thing is, a customer buys the hardcover, the audio, and the ebook. So one leads to another. So there's cross. They hear the audio, then they want the hardcover. They read the hardcover, they want to hear the audio or the ebook.
But also, you spoke a little bit about the hunger for literature, or the pain and suffering in the world increasing, and then in the last 15 years, the readers of poetry have doubled to.
That's what I was talking about.
Yeah, and that's because the suffering has increased, and so there's a more hunger because we grow and learn vicariously through story. We want to relate to someone else's pain and suffering to know that there's nothing wrong with us. So
I'm not so different.
So that's why I believe poetry is doubled in sales in the last 15 years.
Also, too, because poetry, our attention spans are so short. We're now living in a world of 10-second sound bites, and maybe poetry can fill that also. That gap that you were saying before, that what David was saying, you could just pick it up.
Yeah, you can read a few stanzas and
feel like you can.
Right. Yeah.
That's actually interesting.
Yeah, that's true too.
Yeah.
So, Joan, how do you see the press going forward in the next 20 years? What are your hopes and dreams?
Well, talking 20 years, and we're talking about beyond my lifetime, and my hope is that CavanKerry lives forever, for 100 years. What I see is, I sometimes think about it as us doing the same thing we're doing now, except even better, and probably, and maybe doing more of it, so maybe producing more than 6 books a year, but I would love to work more with the other arts, and have the synergy between poetry, let's say, and visual art and music and that kind of one art feeding another is very fascinating to me, and it's something that, you know, is kind of on the back burner. It's not something that we could do now, but it certainly is something that that I would love to do, and I would love to see our community programs really develop even more. And my precious waiting room reader, I really want the waiting room reader to, we got to find money for the waiting room reader. Because I had a sponsor who, when the person who worked on it with me left the Gold Foundation for Humanism in Medicine, and this new person took it over, he basically said that he didn't think that the waiting room reader was a viable financial investment for the foundation. And I have to tell you that the investment wasn't more than $20,000 a year, which is pretty astounding. But yes, I really want poetry in the places where people work and live and receive services. You know, I look at we have right outside of our house, we have the ferry that goes back and forth from Brooklyn to New York. And I keep looking at that ferry, and when I'm riding along, I say, this is a great opportunity for some poems. You know, in unexpected places.
Jury duty.
Jury duty, yes.
Car inspections,
Wow.
all that. Talk a little bit, if you would, about the role of the board and how they've been helpful to the mission of the press and your hopes going forward as well.
Well, basically, I have to say that I rely on the board to make my dream possible, and that is to bring us, CavanKerry, into its next many years. I realized at one point when I was trying to figure out how to, get this press to be able to take care of itself, which basically meant that it would, it made enough money or brought in enough money through grants and donations so that it could pay its bills. Because our family foundation is still handling almost half of the budget for the press. And that doesn't even look good to funders, And I have to tell you that no matter what I put into it, nothing above $2,000 can be credited to the press as a deduction. So I decided that the only way that I could hopefully get to a point where the press would reach some independence was if I looked for business experts. I don't need somebody now to teach me how to put a press together. I need people to teach me how to develop a business on another level, how to, I know how to run the candy store, but I want, we have to grow up and go beyond the candy store now. And I need people who have connections, network. I don't have connections. I have connections, but they're used up already. I don't have anybody else that I can tap. And I need that, the networking that business experts can really provide. So I look at the board as a kind of a think and idea and work tank to support and grow CavanKerry.
Is there anything that I'm not asking that you wanted asked? Or should we open it up to
I don't think so.
to the room?
Sure.
Any questions?
Yes.
Have you ever thought of a compilation? You know, I love the human experience term. And it means so much. It means love, it means death, it means pain, it means suffering, it means illness, it means joy, happiness, anger. So, with almost 100 books, have you ever thought about compiling like a whole human experience with pieces from different authors?
Well, it's interesting that you raised that, because basically the waiting room reader is designed and conceived as a collection of works, prose and poetry, that are about life gifts. So, family, marriage, work, food, nature. And we were given $5,000 2 years ago by a woman who wanted us to do something to honor her mother, and who had died. And I had, this is gross. And I had all sorts of ideas. I suggested that we dedicate any of the books that were coming up this year and last year to her mother, and none of them really worked for her. So she suggested a compilation of CavanKerry poets to celebrate the 20th anniversary. So one of the things that I've been very clear about in terms of the 20th anniversary is that I don't want this to be a Joan celebration or a celebration of Joan. I really believe that the press is what it is because, and I'm not negating my place in this, but it's because of the writers, because of the amazing work that we have. And so it looks like we're going to produce a book of possibly 100 pieces, a small piece from all of the books that we published. Yeah, that's pretty much a given at this point.
What would you call it? Do you have a working title?
No.
100 authors, 20 years. How's that?
It's I want it to be more inspired than that.
Probably draw from the mission statement or the tagline.
Yeah.
I would imagine something that really synthesizes.
I mean, what you're
about.
talking about could certainly be a tag, like, a
Subtitle.
subtitle.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be something as tacky as, happy birthday, CavanKerry, or whatever. I don't know. So.
Coming soon.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So I'm fascinated by you having gone through your bout with depression, and I myself am similarly, inclined.
Prone.
Yeah, prone, and it's a question that I've wrestled with, but you wanted to create something for for your own well-being and health. At any point, did it occur to you the magnificent amount of denials and rejections that a writer of any sort goes through when they decide to open their art up to others.
It was paralyzing for many years because the only way that I could get myself to write was to say, I don't have to show this to anybody. Because absolutely, you get millions, and that's just a slight exaggeration, of rejections. I get them all the time. And actually, the one thing that I really worked very hard on this, and because every poem that I read that I loved, I wanted to be mine. And I suffered a lot from envy of other artists, and I struggled with that. Like, how does that envy is something that's so toxic that it can destroy whatever pleasure you get from making anything. And I thought the only thing that would allow me to deal with the envy was for me to find out what it was that I do that's my own. And that started my whole study of voice. And the fact that isn't something that you learn. It's something that's there, but you learn how to free it and you learn how to express it. The amount of rejection we as writers, but not just writers, musicians,
Entrepreneurs.
It's incredible. And I don't know, at a certain point you just say, oh well,